Some books arrive quietly yet carry an oddly transformative power, not through grand theories or sweeping promises, but by focusing on something so deceptively small it's often overlooked. The First Minute by Chris Fenning is very much that kind of book. It's about the seemingly humble topic of how we start conversations, particularly in the workplace. Yet as you read, it dawns on you that these first moments of speaking, those opening words we often rush or improvise, are not small at all. They're the hinge on which clarity, understanding, and even trust can turn. Fenning writes with the steady, clear-eyed tone of someone who has seen firsthand how easily workplace communication goes wrong, and how easily it could go right if only we'd pause to think about how we begin. His premise is refreshingly simple. The first minute of any conversation is where we set the scene. It's where we define the topic, the purpose, and what we need from the other person. And if we don't get that right, the rest of the conversation often spirals into confusion, wasted time, or polite frustration. What makes this book feel so human is that Fenning doesn't scold or patronize. Instead, he writes like someone who has also stumbled through muddled explanations, watched eyes glaze over in meetings, or struggled to articulate an idea under pressure. He understands that in the real world, communication isn't always neat. We're distracted, busy, and sometimes nervous. And that's exactly why having a clear method matters even more. The method itself is as crisp as it is memorable. Topic, purpose, and next step. 3 short words that, when applied, can transform rambling updates, clumsy meeting intros, or anxious status reports into clear, focused moments of shared understanding. For example, instead of diving straight into a sea of details, you'd begin by stating the topic. I'd like to talk about the launch timeline, then the purpose, to check if we're still on track for next week. And finally, what you need from the listener. I'd appreciate your thoughts on any blockers you see. What sounds almost too simple on paper becomes quietly profound in practice. Fenning illustrates, through relatable workplace stories, how the absence of this structure leads to meetings that feel aimless, emails that get ignored, and conversations where everyone leaves with a different understanding of what was decided. Conversely, when someone starts clearly, stating upfront why they're speaking and what they hope will happen next, the room relaxes. People listen because they know what they're listening for. One of the book's most quietly powerful insights is that clarity isn't about using big words or sounding impressive. It's about making life easier for the listener. In a world drowning in information and distractions, that small act of mental organization is not just courteous, it's an act of leadership. It says, I respect your time and attention, so let me guide you straight to what matters. Fenning also has an empathetic eye for the reality of workplace dynamics. The manager who wants the bottom line before the details, the colleague who rambles out of nervousness, the technical expert whose deep knowledge makes it hard to see what's clear to others. Instead of blaming personality types, he shows how a shared structure, topic, purpose, next step, becomes a common language that can bridge those gaps. It gives everyone, from introverts to extroverts, a fair chance to be heard and understood. Another thing that makes the book feel quietly humane is its realism about change. Fenning doesn't pretend this is a magic trick. Habits are stubborn. The instinct to just start talking is strong, especially under pressure. But he suggests practicing deliberately, before meetings, when writing emails, or even rehearsing aloud. Over time, this becomes less a rigid formula and more a mental habit. Something you do almost unconsciously, like checking your mirrors before changing lanes. What surprised me most reading The First Minute was how the book gently expands beyond work. Though framed around professional settings, its principles apply anywhere clarity matters. Explaining something to a friend, making a request at home, or even calming our own thoughts before we speak. It's ultimately about respect, for the listener, for ourselves, and for the shared time that conversation represents. By the time you finish, you may find yourself more sensitive to how conversations begin, noticing when others dive into details without context, or when your own words spill out in a rush. And perhaps you'll pause, breathe, and find those 3 grounding questions. What's my topic? Why am I talking about it? And what do I want to happen next? It might seem small, but in the rhythm of daily communication, in busy offices, crowded Zoom calls, or quick hallway chats, those first 60 seconds often decide whether we're heard, whether we understand, and whether we leave the conversation with clarity rather than confusion. Closing the first minute, you don't feel you've been given a complicated system to memorize. Instead, you feel you've been handed a lens, A way to see conversation not as spontaneous chaos but as something we can shape, gently but powerfully, by choosing how we begin. And perhaps in that first clear minute, we set the tone not just for better meetings or smoother projects, but for a culture where people feel seen, heard, and understood. And what could matter more than that?